bit of a problem for our team. And, in the second half of last season, we went on a massive run and picked up some big, big wins. And at the same stage last season, there was obviously similar questions. And so it's going to take Arsenal to put in some big goal performances, like we saw last week against Manchester City, of course.
Still can't believe it.
To show that we are still very much capable of that. And none of those goals that were scored against City came from set pieces either. So
wow, we scored from open play. Wow.
Unbelievable, I know. But yes, that's ultimately been a big, big problem. But Ødegaard definitely deserves scrutiny for the performances in some ways that he's put on. I really thought that he might build upon that goal that he scored against Manchester City, but his performance against Newcastle was pretty atrocious. He had the chance to put Arsenal 1-0 up in the game and back into the tie and skewed his shot. He had another chance just before that was blocked. He had opportunities that, Ødegaard, if we were talking about him the same time last season, maybe he scores those chances. And he knows this. He's done interviews this season where he talks openly about exactly. He's talked openly about the fact that he needs to be better and his goal tally's not been good enough. And he's very self-scrutinizing in that. Obviously, he's got his personal life, which has changed quite dramatically this season, but that isn't an excuse, for the change of his form. But his injury and illness certainly has been something that you can point to and think that's disrupted his flow and his momentum. And it's very hard to get that back, especially when you're in a team that is so demanding and then so short of the players that you've been so used to playing with in White and Saka, that when you've come back from injury are suddenly gone and aren't there, and you're playing with these different players out of position.
And football's about relationships, man.
100%. And so that he has really suffered as a result, but he also needs to do better.
Do you think there's too much of a creative burden specifically on Martin Ødegaard? I get it. He's in the 8.5, in the 10. I mean, it's Martin Ødegaard. He's the most creative player we've got. But I do believe that because, as you said, he needs to do better, whether his key players are there or not. He knows he needs to do better. The man, he said it himself. But I also feel that if your creativity, quote unquote, is going to live or die by one player, when he has an off day, you're in trouble. But where are you at with that?
Well, obviously, Saka was, I think, got the most assists in our team last season. Before his injury, was on course for potentially breaking that assist record in the Premier League set by Thierry Henry this season prior.
Which would have been lovely.
Shocked if he's going to beat that now. So obviously, I don't think it's solely, on Ødegaard to be the creative force in that team. I think those numbers prove that point. I also think we've got a centre forward in Havertz that's very important to the way in which we create opportunities. And there's a lot of scrutiny, and rightfully so, about his finishing ability, but his collaboration and the way in which he sets plays up and creates for his teammates, as he did for Ødegaard in that game against City, is also an important part of our team. So it's not solely on him, but there's definitely a big weight on Ødegaard to be a creator. And when he's not on song in a game, you can definitely see the impact on the team, as a result. And I remember that period where he was missing. We did look pretty devoid of ideas.
Everyone was crying for him to be back. It's football.
Exactly. And I thought maybe Waneri could have been used more during that period, but the way in which Waneri's kind of come back from this recent injury, and the fact that he got that injury, I think, to a degree, vindicated maybe why he didn't come in so early in this season and why it's been a gradual process with him. But we're starting to see him now, and hopefully with, him now definitely going to be starting games with Martinelli and Saka at the same time, and Jesus out too, that hopefully Waneri can start to take on more responsibility as well.
I think you're bang on the money. And I think on one hand, I'm excited or scared about our attackers. I feel Kai Havertz, in my opinion, I actually think we've got as much lemon from Kai Havertz as himself. I feel Kai Havertz has, respectfully to his teammates, pulled a lot more of his weight. I think he's been a lot more reliable, and he has scored goals. That being said, I don't believe Kai Havertz in this current role is going to get us over the line. That's nothing to do with him. And I think that's on the club to sign a number 9, right? But to have Kai Havertz, who for me as well has looked knackered more than anything, has looked absolutely knackered, as you said, is a facilitator. And to be without your first choice wingers now, and to be relying on, as talented as he is, a young Ethan, it kind of does scare me. And it would be a romantic story as if in May we win something, but we'll have to see. I want to continue the theme about midfielders. Yeah, what have you made about Declan Rice in the 8, and what have you made about Partey this season in midfield? Obviously with Partey, I
think Partey's probably had his best season in an Arsenal shirt this year. He was available a lot, I think, in 22-23. I think he was available, and he also had a very good season.
Been good, there. Man.
And he's been very good, and that of course means that Rice is going to play that 8. I think Rice, obviously suffering that broken toe, the hangover from the Euros in the summer, and an incredible amount of football, we're only just at this point at midway starting to see the best again of Declan Rice. He was astonishing against City, like ran that game, the engine
a
he
monster.
showed. That's the Rice that we have come to learn, is what he's willing to, and not willing to, but he's able, to give us. So that is going to be a big position in the summer that we expect to change. There's no indication that Arsenal are in talks with Partey over a new deal right now. All indication is just extrapolating from that to let us know that at this moment in time, he's going to be leaving at the conclusion of his current deal. And also, we know that Martin Zubimendi is a player the club have, done a lot of work behind the scenes to try and secure. And there's a big feeling that is a deal that will happen this summer. And Arsenal may end up paying over, the release clause to get more favourable terms in terms of a payment structure for that deal. So when it comes to him, that is a huge, void that in terms of quality, in terms of the role that Zubimendi is going to have to fill. But if you're asking Arsenal to be ambitious in the market, you're probably looking at going and getting the best option on the market to replace a defensive midfielder in Zubimendi. So I think both Partey and Rice have been, Partey in particular has been excellent this season. Rice, I think we're starting again to see the best of him now. He's been able to gradually kind of come back to form.
So what have you made of Rice in the 8? And if it was down to you, obviously you're not Mikel Arteta or the Cronkies or anyone that makes the decision, but like, what have you made of Rice in the 8? And would you give Partey a new deal if it was up to you?
Well, it's not up to me. And I do kind of see the idea about just taking that step now to move on, because we know that he has and does suffer with these just spontaneous injuries that keep him out for long periods of time. And he's on a huge wage. He's in his 30s. The likelihood is that this is, this what we're seeing from him this season could be the best that we do see of him. So if you suddenly give him a new deal rather than signing a younger option that's on the market and available, that you are potentially, taking a very significant risk in that sense. So, yeah, I think from that standpoint, I can understand why the club may indeed decide to move on. With Rice in the 8, he's not scored enough goals this season. I think that's
something he's mentioned himself.
And he knows that, as you point out. And I think that is definitely a kind of a faculty of a left-sided 8 in this Arsenal team that needs to be better. He needs to score more goals. He needs to contribute more to the forward line. He's contributed brilliantly with set piece taking. His
maybe not a reason, but generally, you're right.
He's been absolutely excellent when it comes to his kind of set piece deliveries, and that is a weapon that Arsenal have really harnessed this season. But we are starting to see him, back to his best again. And then we saw that. I think the Man City game was the perfect example. Even against Newcastle, I was doing the player ratings after that game, and he and Partey again stood out as probably our 2 best players.
Best of a bad bunch, yeah.
The defence and the goalkeeper let us down, and the forward line let us down in that game. But the midfield didn't, other than Ødegaard. It was just Partey and Rice really did put on a very good display, I thought, despite everybody else around them not delivering. So when that changes, it's going to be very intriguing to see how a new partnership kind of evolves.
And like you said, it's going to be interesting because on one hand, I want the best of both worlds, which would be, if life was simple and Partey keeps this up, you might get a 1 year plus an option. You've got Zubimendi or your game changer. You've got Moreno. You've obviously got Rice, right? But I don't think that's feasible with Ethan's emergence, with Moreno, with us probably bringing in another midfielder, with, like you said, the wages Partey's on. And then you also have to caveat that by saying, and I'm not suggesting this is Thomas, but how many times have you seen a player play out of their absolute skin when it comes to their contract? And you said it there, and I kind of agree. I do think this is Partey's best season in terms of, long-term, like longevity. I think I'd go back to the 2022-23 season where I saw a consistent Partey, but I just feel it's a chance to shed the wages. Where Declan Rice is in the 8, I think, it's hard for me not to love Declan Rice. I hear what people say. No one's above criticism, but I just think there's so much more problems at Arsenal than questioning Declan Rice. We finally got an all-action midfielder. I just wonder how good in the 8 can he be? Like, how many goals would he potentially get? Because it's been in the last 2-3 years, or if that he's been learning that. You're going against a strong body of work where he's been a 6. Now, I kind of understand differently why he doesn't play as a 6 in terms of build-up play at Arsenal, but that's the good conversations we want to have. Obviously, you're not an ITK, you only just report, but like, how confident are you in the Zubimendi stuff? Because I do hear it that, we're talking, we're doing all of this, but until a player is holding the shirt, you can never count your chickens for they hatch. And to me, as someone that just reads the news, it seems like Zubimendi, 1 minute he's going to join and then he's turning his back on something, as Liverpool have probably seen, and maybe us a few years ago.
Yeah. I mean, the Liverpool situation is definitely that would give anybody pause for thought. You know, there was a real feeling towards the end of the summer window that was a deal that was going to happen, and he stayed. And there is always that chance that will happen. You know, until you rightly point out, until that player is in an Arsenal shirt and holding up, and it's on the Arsenal website, anything happens.
Anything
How many times have we seen a Fabrizio Romano? Here we go, and then we don't go. So
exactly.
these
Especially
things
in this
are.
modern world.
Exactly. Transfers are volatile. Things change. And, you know, people love jumping on the back of journalists that commit to things very quickly because the transfer game is a wild one.
You lot can't win, man.
You look at, you know, just Arsenal in particular, you've got your ITKs out there. You've got your accounts that deliver transfer news to the best of their knowledge. And usually it comes from a place where they haven't got much to lose, you know, unless they've got something on the line. You're a faceless account. You've not got your name to it. You can just start up another account, try again, go again.
Yeah.
It's a game, and sometimes they genuinely do have their contacts. You know, I'm aware of high follower accounts that have got their links into specific players.
Especially when we signed Partey, the ITKs were doing crazy stuff.
Absolutely, and sometimes people go and acquire information through many means. But from someone who's been in the space for what a couple of years in terms of kind of the journalism side of things, rather than the content creation sides of things. Everything that I've heard regarding the Zubimendi thing gives me a lot of encouragement that this is something that, I'd be fairly confident in saying that we've got a very, very good chance of seeing happen this summer. Arsenal have been, as we know, interested in the player for a very long time. I think the interest dates back, potentially 3 years or more.
Many years, really, at this point.
And he's always been a player that's been very attached to San Sebastian and to Real Sociedad in particular. There is a lot of things changing at that club. Obviously, we've seen Mikel Moreno leave. We've seen a lot of players there, like Alexander Isak, move on. There's very few. There's very few that stick it out. Mikel Oyarzabal has stayed there for a very long time, despite links to Barcelona and Manchester City.
We're even linked with their sporting director.
And Roberto Alaba is expected to leave, in the summer as well. So there's a lot of change there. There's a lot of people that are leaving. And I think that Zubimendi probably recognises that this is the time in his career, in his mid-20s, where this is where you make that move. And if you make that move, it's got to be to a club where you're going to feel very confident. Mikel Arteta has very big connections back to San Sebastian, as we know, and to Real Sociedad in particular, and the people at Real Sociedad. And that puts Arsenal and Mikel Arteta in a particularly good situation to try and convince a player like Martin Zubimendi to join Arsenal. He's played with our captain, Martin Odegaard, at the club as well. Arsenal have interests in other former teammates like Alexander Isak, of course.
The full T-shirt is free as well, Isak, if you're listening.
Absolutely. And Mikel Moreno is here too, a player that he played with as recently as just 6 or 7 months ago. So there is a lot there that gives a big indication. And the biggest indication we've got is that Sami Mokbel, who initially broke this story and got the fantastic scoop, has been very committed in the way in which he's reported that story, that Arsenal are set to land Martin Zubimendi. And then any of the subsequent digging I and others have done around it have only turned up similar kind of feelings. So, yeah, I'm confident about this one.
I mean, and then it raises in question now. Typically, like, obviously, you're not an ITK, but you mentioned your confidence, Sami Mokbel things and whatnot. It seems like when a player is very close to joining one club, quote unquote, they're linked with another. So then when you see the Real Madrid hijack talks, which I'm pretty sure you must have spoken on, does that make you a bit uneasy, especially if Xabi Alonso goes over there?
No, not really at the moment. Stories are written all over the world and names generate a lot of attention. And if you just have a look on things like Google Trends, it will tell you what names are doing the most hits for websites. Websites need hits. And
that's got to be a top one, man.
I remember I did a story a couple of years ago, which was based off of, I think it was Nicolas Pepe, me and a good colleague of mine then who's since moved on to other things, Bailey Keogh. We did kind of this panel piece about Nicolas Pepe and how much he was worth. And I think Bailey wrote something on the lines of, we should be getting 40 million if we sell him. And that then got picked up and used as like, Arsenal looking to sell Pepe for 40 million. It's nuts how these things. It's
crazy how the game works, man.
The snowball is huge in this business. So one line of text in an article can get spun and turned into a whole different story. 10. So you have to be very careful what you write. But as long as you've just said things like, in my opinion, it should be clear enough for most reading.
But people won't know that. You're right, Tom. But that's where I feel sorry for you lot, because you could say, in my opinion, give a think piece as to why you're saying what you're saying, but 2 + 2 = 10. People are just going to say, Tom Gannon said we're going to go and get this, that, and the other.
I've had to like email websites before and say, like, can you guys stop taking quotes from the show that I've done? It'll be like, journalist Tom Canton says this, and it's a story on like my opinion about a player that someone in the chat box
They sensationalize it.
It becomes, it'll go to the top of the Google algorithm because it's a name that's popping right now, and it says Arsenal and transfer, and it's just that is just the way it goes. So you have to kind of like, you have to be careful while you're answering questions. So I'm happy to say that I feel confident about the Martin Zubimendi deal, but it doesn't mean that it's nailed on. And if it doesn't happen this summer, we're going to have pitchforks out for me because I was confident.
The game. Like,
it is what it is. Well, I don't really like reporting on transfers, but unfortunately, that's kind of my job now in many ways.
You're damned if you do, damned if you don't, man. And you probably get it from both sides, because as a content creator, if I believe one thing in 2022 and I change my mind in 2025, I have to be held to the 2022 standard. I can't be a critical thinker and change my opinion dependent on information. Obviously, I kind of want to go through the names we're kind of on a consistent basis linked with. So we've gone with Zubimendi, Alexander Isak, man. I know it's a dream. I know I'm dreaming. I know it's going to take a big transfer fee. But as you mentioned, the old Sociedad boys could be rejoining at Arsenal. And who better than to have Isak feet being fed balls by Odegaard and Saka and whatnot? Do you have any confidence in Isak, or do you think it's more of a pipe dream, not necessarily a realistic one for us?
I think it is a pipe dream. I just can't see. I mean, at the moment, I think Newcastle will qualify in the top 5 in the league. I know Nottingham Forest are going very well at the moment. I still can't help but think they will fall away at some point, and that will snowball. Whereas Newcastle have been there and done it and qualified for the Champions League. Chelsea are on something of a slide themselves. I think Man City will be up there.
They were in the title race. We're not letting them get away with it if we don't win the league.
I think Newcastle probably will get top 5. Joe Linton's injury is quite damaging for them, so maybe that would affect things. But I think they will get at least Europa League, and he has 3 years left on his deal. They're in a very strong position. Arsenal or any club would have to stump up, well over 100 million to convince the richest owners in the sport to part ways. Yes, there's PSR, and that's affected Newcastle in the past, and
it'll take a lot, man.
If they're in European competition, it means they will also have to comply with UEFA financial fair play on top of that, which people forget, of course, with the Arsenal situation right now. But if they're to sell somebody, he's the last person they're going to want to sell. He's their ticket into these competitions. So if they're going to sell somebody, it's more likely to be a Bruno Guimaraes than it is to be an Alexander Isak that Newcastle sell.
I think you're bang on the money, man. I think reluctantly they don't want to sell any of them. But like, as we all know, the striker market, definitely in my 29 years, it's probably the worst period broadly of number 9. So if you've got one, it's like holding on to gold essentially. And I think a lot of people forget, ironically, Newcastle, he was a big ticket item for them. What was it, like 70, 80 million? So they're going to want to keep him. He's of a good age. He's doing great and all of those kind of things. So then where are you at with Benjamin Sesko and Gyökeres?
Gyökeres is obviously €100 million release clause. He's expected to move in the summer, but Sporting will demand that really. They should demand that release clause. He's having another really good season. The issue with Gyökeres, and the reason why I think nobody moved last summer, the reason why he stayed there and nobody, because there's some interesting quotes I think out there, where Gyökeres kind of talks about the summer, and maybe even some surprise around how there wasn't really clubs coming in for him. And I think obviously we saw a lot of the big clubs not really spend. Liverpool and Man City didn't really spend. Man City have waited until January to bring in Marmoush to replace Julian Alvarez. So I think that boils down to the fact that he's playing in the best team in a league where there are only really 2 other competitors in terms of Benfica and Porto. With respect to the Portuguese league, he's having an excellent campaign. But we've seen players like Darwin Núñez have brilliant goal tallies. Vinicius is a great example. Renato Sanchez, Raul Felix. We've seen these names rise and fall. Some have gone on to do really, really well from the Portuguese league. It's not just to say that he won't. But I think the reason why we've not seen clubs like Arsenal be too overly committal is because there is that doubt. Whereas if you look at somebody like Benjamin, and he's 26, I think, years of age.
Yeah, 26, 27, one of them.
Benjamin Sesko has been a player that Arsenal have looked at, obviously, for quite some time before last summer, and then that led to interest at the beginning of the window. But Sesko wasn't able to be guaranteed things by Arsenal about, minutes, because they had Kai Havertz, and people will scoff at that. But that is the reality, that we have a player that had a very good second half of last season.
We shot ourselves in the foot with that.
I mean, you can look back with the benefit of hindsight and say yes, but at that point we'd not sold Eddie Nketiah yet.
True.
And we didn't manage to sell Eddie Nketiah until the end of the window for 30 million quid, which is a very good fee that we got. He then obviously signed a new deal. He was always happy to sign and stay with RB Leipzig because he knew that he was going to play. He knew he was going to be in the Champions League
and
this
season. Get that move.
And he's going to get that move. And I think that he knows that Arsenal are one of the clubs amongst others that are still very keen on him. And he knows that interest is there. I think that Sesko is the better investment over a player like Gyökeres, because not only is obviously he doing it in a much more competitive league for a team that are not the dominant force in that league, his numbers in terms of kind of how clinical he is, in terms of how his finishing is, are better than Gyökeres, despite the raw numbers being less. He's nearly 4 or 5 years younger.
So there's resale value as well.
I think stylistically he suits Arsenal better in terms of kind of the way in which we play. I think, he's, for a tall guy, he's very technically adept at what he does. Some of the goals, if you go back and watch,
physical specimen, man.
He's excellent. And Gyökeres is that too, but Gyökeres has really benefited from those runs in behind and having more space in Portugal to play. And we saw that against Man City when the goals that he scored 2 were penalties, but the goal that he got in behind, was from space as he ran through. Those opportunities aren't coming up as much at Arsenal, as I think Sesko is more of a rounded centre forward in comparison. But most importantly, those finishing numbers are very, very impressive. I'm talking about numbers that are, nearly twice that of Havertz, and nearly 33% better than Gyökeres in terms of how good he is at finishing. So that is something that is the reason why Arsenal have been so very keen.
What do you make of, because I know a lot's been said about Mikel Arteta and strikers, and you do look at the amount of defenders. Obviously, in the 5 years, there's been different priorities, clearly. I think in the last 3, definitely the last 2, a striker's been highlighted. A striker's actually been kind of needed. But, what do you make of the role that's demanded? Because that's a lot that's being said. Is people say it's not a Mikel Arteta striker. I think Isaac is. I think Sesko is. But what do you think he's looking for beyond, obviously, goals, whoever's going to walk in?
Somebody that wants to play for Arsenal always is that they have to want to really be part of this Arsenal project and buy into what Arsenal are about. It's why Arsenal haven't moved for other figures in the game that people have been pining for a very long time, and that goes for other clubs why they haven't gone in for those players as well. I think that it needs to be a player that is not just about, as you say, the goal scoring. They need to collaborate. They need to link play well. They need to be able to showcase high levels of pressing energy in a team and dedicate themselves to pushing and pressing into those back 4 or back 5s that Arsenal will be coming up against. And they need to have the right mindset, and Arsenal do a lot of due diligence when it comes to that, and they need to be cost effective when it comes to kind of the market.
Which Sesko is.
Well. Which Sesko, I would look at his age bracket and potentially, a 70 million pound price tag. I think probably you are looking at the most cost-effective centre forward on the market for the quality that he does bring. Those that don't rate him, I'm sorry, I'm going to be very blunt with this. You've just not watched him. You've just not watched him enough.
I'm with you.
And I think that a player like Sesko will, I think, prove those people wrong. And I think looking at the bleakness of the transfer market for centre forwards. Santiago Jimenez was a player that's being talked about. He's gone to Milan for 30-something million quid.
Osman's playing in Turkey with the greatest of respect. Vlahovic's contract's running down at Juventus. These are names that are always thrown with
I've seen Arsenal fans suggest Vlahovic and be like, oh, Vlahovic, because he's not the highest paid player in Italy at £300,000 per week, which if you were to move to Arsenal, you'd probably expect a pay bump. Exactly. His finishing numbers are horrendous, genuinely awful. He's got 0.06 goal per shot this season.
He ain't kicked on since the initial links, in 2022.
Havertz's goal per shot's nearly 3 times better than Vlahovic this season.
Which is the issue. If we're going to bring in a striker that's not better than Havertz at the primary job at that, it doesn't make any sense. So then where you at with the striker thing? Because before I ask you about the wide man, yeah, as much as I want Sesko and the dream would be Isaac, again, I do think some Arsenal fans could be forgiven for, the club will say we tried, we couldn't get anyone. Fundamentally, we don't get anyone. Is it imperative we pivot to another target if you get Sesko? Like we need a forward going into next season for you?
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, Jesus is still going to be injured. There's the expectation that he won't be back until, maybe the end of the year. Arsenal have to find that player. They have to find the player that is going to take them to the next level in terms of that position. Havertz cannot be, with all due respect, and I like Havertz a lot, and I've defended him a lot against, some ridiculous ridicule. He, for me, is not the centre forward that takes Arsenal to the title.
Too much of a burden on his shoulders, man.
I think that Arsenal can win a title with Havertz as their centre forward. And we saw that last season where we were one win away from that being a reality. And you could pinpoint a load of points throughout the season where had something different,
West Ham at home
won the league. So I think that shows that you can win one with him, but the chances of it are much lower if it's him over, say, somebody else. And I'm not saying that Sesko comes in and does that. I think Sesko is the type of signing you do to become your own version of a world-class centre forward. Salah wasn't Salah when he joined Liverpool. The Salah we know now and have known. It's about trajectory. It's about signing somebody that's on the up. So I don't want a project. So I never wanted to entertain the Rashford situation.
I'm not on that at all. Thank the Lord we didn't do that, man.
Exactly. Arsenal need players that are on the rise, not players they need to revive. That's the way in which Arsenal should be.
Damaged players, essentially.
Exactly.
Which is a shame. So where are you at with Nico Williams? Because I'm just trying to go through the ones that are like Zubimendi, Sesko, the ones that are always linked with us, where it's fair to say there must be some interest.
Yeah, I think that Williams is a really interesting profile of player because last season was arguably the best, most high-profile left winger of his age bracket on the planet, and was producing some fantastic performances and took that into a European Championships and scored in a European final to help Spain win against a very good England side. So you'll then expect him either to make that move, or you're expecting him to build upon that and have another great season. Neither of those two things have happened. He didn't get the move, and his numbers this season have been, in terms of output, very mediocre in a good athletic side that continue to be in contention for Champions League qualification and are still in the Europa League and are hosting the Europa League final in Bilbao at the end of the season as well. So there was no chance really of him leaving in January because he would have wanted to stay at least for that. Imagine leaving your hometown club when they're hosting the Europa League final.
You could never return, man.
Absolutely not. So that was never, ever a situation that was on the cards. I think that when you're looking at him as a signing, financially, it could be a very good deal to do because the release clause is, I think, just around over £50 million.
In that region, yeah.
For Arsenal, which for a player of his age and profile, you tend to see Mudryk level money, Anthony level money being paid for players that
it's the going rate now
are no guarantees. So it is a release clause that would have to be paid, or a buyout clause that would have to be paid up front, which, as you all Spanish buyout clauses are. Of course, Arsenal could look similarly to what we expect with Zubimendi to maybe pay more and negotiate better terms. And Arteta really does like Williams. He's a big fan of Nico Williams, and they may indeed return for him. But the priority will be centre forward and central defensive midfield for the summer as priority targets. Because when you've got a player like Ethan Nwaneri who has come through, you've already got Trossard, you've already got Martinelli at the club. That isn't necessarily going to be as high of a priority as the centre forward and CDM position when you're losing Partey.
True.
If Trossard leaves, and he could leave because we know there was a bid from Saudi Arabia at the end of last summer. That could happen again this summer. We know that Al Nassr are going to be looking for left wingers after they failed.
Life-changing money as well, to be fair to Trossard.
I wouldn't be surprised if that was a move that happened in the summer, Trossard to Saudi. It wouldn't surprise me at all. And then Arsenal would then have more of a reason to move maybe more aggressively for a player like Williams. But there isn't any guarantees that he is the answer. We know that Antoine Semenyo is a player that they've looked at. We know that Mateus Cunha is a player that they've looked at. So they also could be options for Arsenal in those wider positions in the summer as well. So yeah, we're gonna have to wait and see what happens on the wing.
You're right, man. But based on what you're saying with the players, and I guess it's the going rate, it's going to be expensive, man. Like what Sesko's going to be around 70. If we were to get Isaac, you're talking the hundreds. Zubimendi, it might be a little bit over 50 million, as you said, if depending on how we go around that. Nico Williams, the same, and obviously his wages. Obviously, if we were to name Arsenal's strongest 11, give or take, I think we're not going to do that, but everybody here could probably agree on the nucleus. You might differ with the fullbacks, maybe who's on the left-hand side at this moment in time. But I think we'd all agree who's up front, which at this moment in time is Kai Havertz, and obviously in midfield. If we assumed we got either Isaac or Sesko or whatever, and we've got Zubimendi, Rice, and Odegaard, where does that place Kai Havertz for you? Because yeah, on one hand, you know, Tom knows, we all know you need a squad, etc. But then Kai wouldn't be in the strongest 11, and some would say on them wages you can't have a squad player on that. But what's your thinking around
that? The wage thing always is something that gets
crazy.
He was on a big wage at Chelsea. He was a market opportunity. He was considered one of the best prospects, you know, in world football. He went to Chelsea, scored in the Champions League final, and Arteta saw it as, and the club saw it